Rome was not just an empire of soldiers and steel. It was an empire of symbols. Every victory had to be seen. Every defeat had to be remembered. And when Rome defeated a kingdom, the punishment did not end on the battlefield. For defeated queens, survival did not mean freedom. It meant something far worse. Imagine the scene. A victorious Roman general, hailed as a hero, parades through the streets of Rome. This was the Roman triumph, the ultimate display of power and prestige. Chariots gleam, soldiers march in perfect formation, and the spoils of war gold art, exotic animals are paraded for all to see. But the most valuable prize, the centerpiece of this grand spectacle, was human. The defeated enemy leaders, kings, and queens were forced to walk in chains before the cheering crowds. For a queen, a woman who once commanded armies and ruled nations, this was the ultimate humiliation. Stripped of her crown, her robes, and her dignity, she was transformed into a living symbol of Rome's might. Her people were conquered, her kingdom was gone, and now her very existence served to glorify her conquerors. This wasn't just a parade. It was a psychological weapon. It sent a clear message to the world. Defy Rome, and this will be your fate. One of the most famous examples is Queen Zenobia of Palmyra. She was a brilliant ruler who carved out a vast empire in the East, challenging Roman authority itself. For a time, she was one of the most powerful women in the world. But when the Emperor Aurelian finally defeated her, her fate was sealed. According to some accounts, she was paraded in his triumph, bound in chains of solid gold, so heavily adorned with jewels that she could barely walk. She was no longer Zenobia, the warrior queen. She was a trophy, a beautiful, broken object for the Roman public to gawk at. What happened after the triumph? The fate of male leaders was often grim. Many were executed in a dungeon at the end of the parade route, but for queens, the story was often different. Rome, for all its brutality, had a complex view of powerful women. Sometimes, execution was seen as unseemly. So, after being publicly shamed, a defeated queen might be granted a form of retirement. This wasn't a return to a life of luxury. It was a gilded cage. Zenobia, for instance, was reportedly given a villa outside Rome. She lived out her days in comfortable exile, her children marrying into the Roman aristocracy. On the surface, it seems like a merciful fate. But think about what was truly lost. She was forever separated from her homeland, her culture, and the power she once wielded. She lived as a constant reminder of Roman dominance, her story told and retold not as a tale of her own greatness, but as a footnote in the story of the Roman emperor who conquered her. Her survival was, in itself, a form of punishment. Every day, she would wake up a foreigner in the land of her enemies, her identity stripped away and replaced with the label of conquered. It was a slow, psychological erasure. Rome didn't just defeat its enemies, it absorbed them, dehisted them, and rewrote their stories to fit its own narrative of eternal glory. The same fate befell others. Cleopatra Selene II, the daughter of the famous Cleopatra and Mark Antony, was another example. After her parents' defeat and death, she and her siblings were taken to Rome and paraded in Octavian's triumph. She was just a child. Instead of being executed, she was raised in the household of Octavian's own sister. She was eventually married off to a client king, Juba II of Mauritania. While she became a powerful and effective ruler in her new kingdom, she was always a pawn in Rome's grand political game. Her life was dictated not by her own choices, but by the will of her family's conqueror. This was the Roman way. Conquest wasn't just about winning battles. It was about controlling the narrative. By parading defeated queens and then placing them in luxurious exile, Rome demonstrated a sophisticated form of power. It showed it was strong enough to crush any opposition, but also civilized enough to display a calculated form of mercy. This mercy, however, served its own purpose. It turned a potential martyr into a living monument of Roman supremacy. A dead queen could inspire rebellion. A living, but powerless, queen served as a permanent warning. So, the next time you think of the Roman Empire, remember that its power wasn't just in its legions. It was in its symbols, its parades, and its ability to turn the proudest rulers into instruments of its own propaganda. For the defeated queens of the ancient world, survival was not a victory. It was the final, and perhaps most cruel, stage. Why did so many powerful queens in history meet such tragic ends at the hands of Rome? To really get it, you have to understand the Roman mindset about victory. For Rome, winning wasn't just about defeating an army on the battlefield. It was about total, absolute domination. A defeated enemy wasn't just beaten, they were utterly broken. This philosophy extended to everything and everyone associated with that enemy. Their leaders, their families, and especially their rulers. Think about it from a Roman perspective. Capturing an enemy king or queen was the ultimate trophy. It was tangible proof of Rome's superiority and divine favor. The more powerful and revered that ruler had been in their own kingdom, the more glorious their defeat was for Rome. This meant their downfall had to be a public spectacle, a grand, humiliating performance designed to awe the Roman populace and terrify its enemies. It wasn't just punishment. It was political theater of the highest order. This brings us to the Roman triumph, one of the most elaborate and important ceremonies in their culture. Imagine a massive parade through the streets of Rome, led by a victorious general. There would be soldiers, carts piled high with plundered treasure, exotic animals from conquered lands, and senators in their finest robes. But the centerpiece, the main event, was the display of the captured enemies. And leading this procession of captives, in chains, would be the defeated monarchs. This was the fate that awaited so many. They were paraded through the city, forced to walk before the chariot of their conqueror. The crowds would jeer, spit, and celebrate the downfall of once mighty royalty. For a queen who had commanded armies and ruled a nation, this was the ultimate degradation. Her power, her divinity, her very identity was stripped away in front of thousands. It was a clear message to the world. This is what happens when you defy Rome. Take the famous case of Zenobia, the warrior queen of Palmyra. For years, she challenged Roman authority in the East, building a vast empire. She was brilliant, powerful, and commanded immense respect. But when the Emperor Aurelian finally defeated her, her fate was sealed. According to some sources, she was brought to Rome and forced to march in his triumph, adorned with so much gold and jewels that she could barely walk. She was the star attraction in her own humiliation. And what happened after the parade? The options were bleak. Male rulers were often taken to the Tullianum, a notorious prison at the foot of the Capitoline Hill. There, they were typically strangled or left to starve. It was a brutal and unceremonious end, a final insult after the public shame. For queens, the outcome could vary. Some, like Zenobia, were reportedly spared execution and allowed to live out their days in a comfortable, albeit captive retirement in a Roman villa. This wasn't an act of mercy. It was a different kind of power play. A live-in, defeated queen served as a constant, walking reminder of Roman might. Then there's the story of Cleopatra. Knowing the Roman triumph awaited her, she chose a different path. The thought of being paraded through Rome by her rival, Octavian, was unbearable. Her famous suicide was not just an act of despair. It was her final act of defiance. By taking her own life, she denied Octavian his ultimate prize. She robbed him of the chance to display the Queen of Egypt in chains, preserving her own dignity and legacy on her own terms. So, when we look at the fates of these queens, it's about more than just individual tragedies. It's a window into the Roman soul. Their culture was built on the idea of absolute victory, where the complete humiliation of an enemy was just as important as winning the war. For a queen, the most powerful symbol of her people, this meant a fall from grace that was as public and as devastating as Rome could possibly make it. It was a cruel... Ever wondered what truly happened to the powerful queens who dared to challenge the might of Rome? It's a story far more chilling than just a simple defeat in battle. To a Roman soldier, and especially to a general, a captured queen wasn't seen as a person. She wasn't a mother, a ruler, or a strategist who had just lost her kingdom. No, she was something else entirely. She was the ultimate prize, a living, breathing trophy. Imagine the scene. A victorious Roman general returning to the city. The crowds are roaring. The streets are lined with cheering citizens. And in the center of this grand procession, this triumph would be the spoils of war. Gold, exotic animals, captured soldiers in chains. But the centerpiece, the most coveted symbol of victory, was the captured queen herself. Why was she so important? Because she represented everything the Romans had conquered. She was the physical embodiment of a defeated nation. Her presence in chains, paraded through the streets of Rome, was a powerful and visceral message to everyone watching. It said, "Look at this mighty ruler, once worshipped and feared. Now she is our captive. Her kingdom is ours." It was the ultimate demonstration of Roman dominance. Her humiliation was their glory. But it went even deeper than that. A queen also symbolized a broken bloodline. For ancient societies, lineage was everything. Royal blood was seen as divine, a sacred line stretching back through generations, believed to be chosen by the gods. By capturing the queen, the Romans weren't just conquering land, they were severing that sacred line. They were showing the world, and the conquered people themselves, that their gods had abandoned them, that their royal heritage was now meaningless. The future of that dynasty, the very continuation of that people's identity, was now broken and held captive by Rome. Think of famous examples: Zenobia, the warrior queen of Palmyra, who carved out a massive empire for herself in the east. When she was finally defeated by Emperor Aurelian, her fate was to be the star attraction in his triumph. Adorned with so much gold and jewels that she could barely walk, she was paraded through Rome as the ultimate symbol of a crushed rebellion. Her power, her ambition, her entire legacy reduced to a spectacle for the Roman mob. And what about Cleopatra? Her story is probably the most famous. She knew exactly what awaited her if she were captured by Octavian. She knew she would be the prize exhibit in his triumph, a symbol of Egypt's fall and the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty. The shame and humiliation of that fate were so unbearable that she chose to take her own life instead. Her choice highlights just how devastating this destiny was considered. It was a fate worse than death. So, when we look back at these historical accounts, it's crucial to see these queens through the eyes of their captors. To their Romans, they were not individuals with thoughts, feelings, or a history of their own. They were potent symbols. They were living monuments to Roman power, walking proof that no one, no matter how royal or powerful, could stand against the might of the legions. Their capture was the final chapter in the story of their nation's fall, a story written not with ink, but with chains and public humiliation on the streets of Rome. It's a brutal and fascinating aspect of Roman warfare and psychology. The conquest wasn't complete until the enemy's spirit embodied. Have you ever wondered what happens when a queen falls from grace? When the crown slips and the world turns against her? It's not just about losing power or wealth. For many queens throughout history, the first and most brutal punishment was something far more personal: humiliation. This wasn't a swift execution or a quiet exile. It was a calculated, public spectacle designed to strip away not just her title, but her very identity and dignity. Imagine being a queen, revered, adorned in the finest silks and jewels, the embodiment of your nation's pride. Then, in an instant, it's all torn away. The first step was often the most visceral, stripping her of her royal clothing. These weren't just garments. They were symbols of her authority, her lineage, her divine right to rule. Ripping them off her was a physical act of delegitimization. It was a way of saying, "You are no longer one of us. You are nothing." In place of her magnificent gowns, she would be forced into something coarse and simple, perhaps the rough-spun dress of a peasant, or even more degrading, the traditional clothing of a foreign enemy. This forced costume change was a powerful psychological weapon. It told everyone who saw her that she was no longer a queen, but a commoner, or worse, a traitor. Every scratchy fiber of the fabric was a constant reminder of her downfall. She was forced to wear her shame. But the humiliation didn't end in the privacy of a chamber. The next step was the parade. She would be forced to walk, sometimes barefoot, through the very streets where she was once cheered. The audience was crucial. She would be paraded before the soldiers who once swore to protect her, now jeering and mocking. She would be displayed before the common folk who once looked up to her in awe, now seeing her brought low, vulnerable, and exposed. This wasn't just punishment. It was a performance, a grim and terrifying play where the queen was the main attraction, and her downfall was the grand finale. Think of Zenobia, the warrior queen of Palmyra. After being defeated by the Roman Emperor Aurelian, she was bound in golden chains of cruel. glittering mockery of her former status and paraded through the streets of Rome during his triumph. She, who had defied an empire, was reduced to a war trophy. Her pride shattered before the eyes of her conquerors. Her people were meant to see this, to understand that resistance was futile, or consider the Empress Matilda of England. During the civil war known as the Anarchy, she had to escape a besieged castle in the dead of winter. How? By dressing in white and sneaking through the snow-covered enemy lines, her royal status completely erased, relying on camouflage and stealth like a common fugitive, just to survive. The humiliation was a tool of war, a way to break her spirit and the morale of her supporters. Why go to such lengths? Because a queen's power was deeply tied to her image, to the mystique and majesty that surrounded her. To shatter that image was to shatter her power. It was a message not just to the queen herself, but to everyone. It told the nobles that no one was untouchable. It told the people that the old order was gone. And it told rival powers that this is what happens to those who fail. This public degradation was a form of political theater, a brutal but effective way to cement a new regime's authority. It was a stark reminder that the distance between a throne and the dirt is sometimes just one bad day. The fall isn't just about losing a crown. It's about being forced to watch as the world you want. Imagine you're a queen. You command armies, rule over vast lands, and your people adore you. Now, picture all of that stripped away in a single, devastating defeat. You're no longer a ruler, but a prisoner, destined for the ultimate humiliation. The Roman triumph. This wasn't just any parade. It was the darkest moment for many captured royals, a spectacle of power designed to showcase Rome's absolute dominance. Let's uncover the grim reality behind this famous ceremony. A Roman triumph was the grandest celebration a victorious general could receive. The streets of Rome would be packed with citizens, roaring with applause as the procession snaked its way through the city. It was a day of feasting, music, and public holidays. For the general, it was the pinnacle of his career. For the captured, it was a living nightmare. The parade was a meticulously choreographed display of conquest. First came the senators and magistrates, followed by trumpeters, heralding the event. Then came the spoiled of war wagons piled high with glittering gold, silver treasures, intricate artworks, and exotic animals from the conquered lands. Captured weapons and armor were paraded as symbols of the enemy's shattered might. But the most compelling part of the spectacle, the part the crowds craned their necks to see, was the display of human captives. And at the heart of this group were the most prized prisoners of all. The defeated kings, princes, and, most poignantly, the queens. These women, who once wore crowns and commanded respect, were reduced to mere trophies. They were often forced to walk barefoot for hours over rough cobblestone streets, their bodies aching and their spirits crushed. Heavy chains, sometimes made of iron, sometimes mockingly of gold, bound their wrists and necks. A physical manifestation of their new status as Roman property. Think of Zenobia, the formidable queen of the Palmyrene Empire. After a defeat by Emperor Aurelian, tradition says she was paraded in his triumph. Picture this powerful warrior queen, who once challenged Rome itself, now shackled in gold, weighed down by so many jewels she could barely walk, forced to endure the jeers and stares of the very people she fought against. Her children were often forced to walk beside her, their innocent faces a stark reminder of the dynastic hopes that had been extinguished. The psychological torment was immense. They were not just defeated, they were publicly shamed, their royal dignity systematically dismantled before a cheering mob. The procession would eventually wind its way to the Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill. Here, the victorious general would offer sacrifices and dedicate a portion of the spoils to the gods. But what happened to the captured queens after the parade ended? Their fates varied. Some, like Zenobia, were granted a form of mercy. She was given a villa and lived out her days in a comfortable, albeit captive, retirement. Her daughters were married off to Roman aristocrats, their bloodline absorbed into the Roman elite. This was considered a gentle fate. Others were not so lucky. Many male captives, especially rival leaders, were taken to the Tullianum, Rome's infamous prison, and ritually strung-led as the general's chariot reached the capital. While queens were generally spared this immediate execution, their lives were often bleak. Some were imprisoned for life, fading into obscurity. Others might take their own lives rather than endure further humiliation, a final act of defiance against their conquerors. The most famous example is Cleopatra of Egypt. Faced with the prospect of being paraded in Octavian's triumph, she chose to die by her own hand, forever robbing him of his ultimate prize. Her suicide became a legendary act, preserving her dignity even in death. So, the next time you hear about a Roman triumph, remember it wasn't just a victory parade. It was a complex ritual of power, propaganda, and profound human suffering. For the captured queens, it was the final, brutal act in a tragedy. A public spectacle where their crowns were replaced with chains, and their reign ended not in a palace, but on the unforgiving streets of Rome. Have you ever wondered what happens after the victory parade? We see the triumphant generals, the cheering crowds, the spoils of war. But what about the captured kings and queens, forced to walk in chains? Their moment in the spotlight is often their last taste of public life before they disappear. The truth is, for these vanquished royals, freedom was almost never an option. Their stories, often lost to history, are a grim reminder that one person's triumph is another's tragedy. Let's pull back the curtain on the aftermath of these grand spectacles. Imagine being a queen, once revered in your own land, now a public spectacle in a foreign city. After being paraded through the streets, a symbol of your kingdom's fall. What came next? It certainly wasn't a quiet retirement. The Romans, masters of both spectacle and strategy, knew that a living, breathing symbol of a conquered people could be dangerous. A spark of rebellion could ignite if their former ruler was seen as a martyr or a potential leader. So, what did they do? One of the most common fates was a form of gilded imprisonment. Many captured royals were locked away in luxurious but heavily guarded villas. Picture this: beautiful homes, often in the scenic Italian countryside, complete with servants, fine food, and all the trappings of a comfortable life. It sounds pleasant, doesn't it? But it was a cage, nonetheless. These villas were prisons disguised as palaces. Every visitor was screened, every letter was read, and guards patrolled the grounds day and night. The queen was a perpetual hostage, a political pawn kept alive as leverage. Her comfort was a tool to ensure her former subjects remained compliant. It was a life of quiet desperation, stripped of all power and purpose, living under the constant watch of her conquerors. Another strategy was exile to distant provinces. Instead of a villa near Rome, a captured queen might be sent to a remote corner of the empire, a place where she had no connections, no allies, and where the language and culture were entirely foreign. Think of being shipped off to a chilly outpost in Gaul or a dusty town in Syria. This isolation was a powerful weapon. It severed her from her past and from anyone who might rally to her cause. She would be a ghost, a forgotten figure living out her days in obscurity. The local governor would be tasked with keeping her under strict surveillance, ensuring she never became a rallying point for local discontent. For a ruler used to be in the center of her world, this forced anonymity was a fate arguably worse than death. And then there was the most direct method: constant, suffocating surveillance right in the heart of the empire. Some were kept in Rome itself, but not in a palace. They were placed in the custody of a powerful Roman family, living in their household as a guest. This was anything but a friendly arrangement. She would be watched by everyone, from the head of the family to the lowest servant. Every conversation, every movement, every sigh was reported. This was psychological warfare. The queen was constantly reminded of her fallen status, living among her enemies, unable to trust anyone. Her children, if they were with her, were often raised as Romans, their identities and heritage systematically erased. The goal was to break her spirit completely, to turn a proud monarch into a powerless, dependent. Zenobia, the formidable queen of Palmyra, is a famous example. After her defeating capture by Emperor Aurelian, she was paraded in golden chains during his triumph in Rome. But what happened next? Historical accounts differ, but the most widely accepted version is that she was given a villa in Tibur, modern-day Turkey. She lived out her days there, and her daughters even married into the Roman aristocracy. It sounds like a peaceful end, but it was an end dictated entirely by her conqueror. She was a bird in a golden cage, her power gone, her kingdom absorbed into the empire. Her story, while less brutal than some, perfectly illustrates this strategy of neutralization through controlled comfort. These fates, the guarded villa, the distant exile, the constant surveillance were all designed to achieve one thing: to erase a queen as political existence while keeping her alive as a symbol of Roman power. Her survival was a constant, living testament to Rome's might. For the queens themselves, it was a life sentence of powerlessness, a slow fade into historical footnote. So the next time you see a depiction of a grand ancient parade, remember the silent figures in chains. Their stories didn't end when the crowds went home. That's when their true ordeal began. Thank you so much for watching. Have you ever wondered why, in the brutal world of ancient Rome, some conquered queens were spared while their male counterparts faced a swift and certain death? It wasn't out of kindness, and it certainly wasn't chivalry. It was cold, hard, political calculation. Keeping a queen alive was often more valuable than killing her. Let's dive into the fascinating and ruthless strategy behind Rome's royal captives. Imagine this. Rome conquers a new, rebellious territory. The king is dead, the army is shattered, but the people are still simmering with defiance. Executing their queen could turn her into a martyr, a symbol of resistance that could fuel rebellions for generations. But keeping her alive, that's a different story. One of Rome's most effective tactics was to use a captured queen as a puppet ruler. They'd place her back on the throne, but only in name. She would be surrounded by Roman advisors, her every move watched. To her people, she's still their queen, a familiar face that provides a sense of continuity and stability. This made Roman rule feel less like a hostile takeover and more like a simple change in administration. It was a brilliant way to pacify a volatile region without needing a massive, permanent army stationed there. The queen becomes the face of Roman control, making it much easier for the populace to accept their new reality. But what if a region was still causing trouble? A captive queen was the ultimate bargaining chip. Think of her as a constant, looming threat. If her people dared to rise up again, Rome could parade her through the streets, in chains, during a triumphal massy public spectacle, celebrating a military victory. This was the ultimate humiliation, not just for the queen, but for her entire nation. It sent a clear message to everyone watching. This is what happens when you defy Rome. Your leaders will be shamed, and your pride will be broken. The psychological impact was immense. The very existence of the captive queen served as a warning, a living symbol of what could be lost, which was a powerful tool for deterring future resistance. Then there was the strategic display of so-called mercy. By sparing a queen, Rome could paint itself as a benevolent conqueror. They could say, "Look, we are not savages. We show clemency to our defeated foes." This was pure propaganda, of course. This mercy was only extended when it served Rome's interests. It was a calculated move to improve their image, both at home and in the eyes of other potential enemies. It suggested that cooperation with Rome could lead to a peaceful existence, while resistance would only lead to ruin. It was a sophisticated good cop, bad cop routine played out on an international stage, with the queen's life as the centerpiece. Let's consider a famous example. Cleopatra of Egypt. After her defeat alongside Mark Antony, Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, brutally wanted to parade her in his triumph in Rome. For him, capturing Cleopatra alive was the ultimate prize. She was the wealthiest and most famous queen in the world. Her capture would have cemented his power and been the grand finale to the civil wars. Her decision to take her own life was, in a way, her final act of defiance. She denied Octavian his greatest propaganda victory, refusing to be a pawn in his political games. Another case is Zenobia, the warrior queen of the Palmyrene Empire. After her defeat, Emperor Aurelian brought her back to Rome, but instead of executing her, he paraded her in his triumph, draped in jewels and golden chains, and then granted her a comfortable retirement in a villa. Why? Because Zenobia's kingdom was a vital buffer state in the east. By treating her with this calculated respect, Aurelian stabilized the region and showed other Eastern rulers that submission to Rome could lead to a peaceful and prosperous life, not just death and destruction. He turned a powerful enemy into a symbol of Roman magnanimity and strategic foresight. So, the next time you read about a conquered queen in Roman history, remember that her survival was rarely a matter of luck or pity. It was a deliberate, strategic choice. She was a political tool, a symbol, a warning, and a piece of propaganda all rolled into one. Her life was a testament to Rome's genius for psychological warfare and its understanding that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a sword, but a captive queen. Thanks for watching. If you found this glimpse into Roman strategy as fascinating as I do, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history. Let me know in the comments which historical figure you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video.